If our body paragraphs are like taking our reader to different locations on a road trip, then you want to give them the best experience at those specific locations. So just as venues go the extra mile to ensure VIP guests have the best seats and access to exclusive information, upgrading your body paragraphs involves providing your readers with the best experiences. This means offering them well-structured content, clear and concise language, and valuable insights. By doing so, you not only capture their attention, but also leave a lasting impression, making your paragraph stand out and ensuring that your readers feel valued and engaged throughout their entire visit. My name is Bernadette Tedesco, and in this lesson, I'm going to be talking about how to upgrade your body paragraphs in relation to Shirley Jackson's novel, We've Always Lived in the Castle. In this lesson, I'm going to be talking about upgrading text features so that they are included in your body paragraph. I'm also going to be talking about how to upgrade your body paragraph by including authorial views and values. I'm going to talk a bit about how to add in context to give your body paragraph that VIP feel, and also how to upgrade those linking sentences. It covers a lot of the main study design dot points, and in particular meta-language, maintaining your analysis of a explicit idea, including context, and also all of those structural features of a body paragraph meet the study design dot point of planning, constructing, and editing analytical writing. So our first upgrade is about including text features. What you need to do is you need to move beyond the basics to make your body paragraph strong. Now let's upgrade our basic paragraphs step by step to make them stronger and leave that lasting impression. We'll begin by including some discussions of text features. When talking about text features, you need to think of text features as another source of evidence. So something like a symbol can be included into a body paragraph, and you would quote that symbolism, for example, the house, because it explains how the author does something. It's not just what the author shows us or who the author is talking about, but how the author creates meaning. You can also add in those text features that build on and relate to other evidence you've included. So if you have included a quote that has a feature within it, then you would highlight that, bring it to the forefront of your discussion. You want to blend that meta-language in naturally where it fits. So you don't have to make it so that every piece of evidence you include talks about meta-language and text features, but you want to try to look for at least one opportunity per paragraph to talk about meta-language. What you don't want to do is review the success of the text feature. So you don't want to say whether the oppressive personification of the house was successful or not. You instead want to talk about how it worked and why the author would have put it in there. You do not want to discuss irrelevant text features just for the sake of having something in there. You want to make sure that it is relevant, that it blends smoothly and naturally. At the same time, you don't want to forget to include it. Don't forget to include meta-language. It is part of the criteria. It must be addressed. So make sure that you bring in those text features to your body paragraph discussion. What I would like you to do is see how you go at identifying a text feature that is relevant to the example and evidence we've included. So if the topic is We've Always Lived in the Castle examines the consequences and isolation and confinement, discuss. And the idea that is being, or the evidence that's being explored is that even though Constance takes care of Mary Cat and Uncle Julian, she's happy to do so and isn't treated like a slave like she was by her parents and by Charles. Try and identify which of these text feature discussions is relevant to this idea of her being treated like a slave. All right. Hopefully you were able to identify this first feature here. Now, It says that Shirley Jackson ensures Mary Cat's character maintained a subordinate tone when speaking with Constance, always prefacing needs with will you and may I. And this is the most relevant because some might say that she still has to take care of Mary Cat and Uncle Julian, and so that's a little bit like she was treated like a slave. However, she chooses. There's a difference between being forced to and choosing to, and so she chooses to take care of Mary Cat, and Mary Cat is very aware of the gift that Constance is giving her. So she uses phrases like will you bake this, may I do that, asking rather than stating that Constance has to do things. The next one here is not the correct answer. The Blackwood House, a place personified ominously as having a gaunt high look and as a place that still held anger, isn't relevant because it's not talking about Mary Cat or Constance or Uncle Julian, and it's not talking about being treated like a slave. This one is also not correct. Shirley Jackson crafts Jim Donnell's dialogue to infer at the townspeople's resentment of the Blackwoods when he sarcastically states, "Not that I ever got invited to take my dinner with them," nothing like that. So that is irrelevant. Yeah, so it is talking about the craft of dialogue, but the example is not relevant. And the third one is not correct. Shirley Jackson uses clothing to symbolize the sisters' rejection of gendered expectations, with Constance wearing men's clothes and Mary Cat wearing a tablecloth. This one might be more suited to the next part of the body paragraph where it talks about Mary Cat rejecting and not having to fulfill those gendered expectations, but it's not relevant to this particular example up here. Another way to upgrade your body paragraphs is to explore the author's views and values. Remember that a text is deliberately crafted. Writing a great text response is not simply about discussing how meanings are created by the author. It's also about exploring why these meanings are created. That adds the extra depth and nuance to your discussion. If you leave this aspect out, you're ignoring an entire segment of what the examiners are looking for. Instead of just talking about the characters as if they are real people, make sure you regularly include the author's name to prompt you to talk about the author craft. So this is one trick to help remind you to bring in authorial views and values. By putting in the author's name, it forces you to take that step back and remember that this is a crafted text, that the author has made deliberate choices. So, for example, a sentence like this: Mary Cat's isolation gave her freedom from fulfilling expected gender roles. This makes the assumption that Mary Cat is a real person that's being talked about, Mary Cat's isolation. Instead, adding in the author's name, Jackson, and then saying whether Jackson is saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, so it's a good thing, she's celebrating, forces us to acknowledge that the author is deliberately creating meaning through the way that the character's narrative has been arced. So Jackson celebrates how Mary Cat's isolation gave her freedom from fulfilling expected gender roles. That's a bit tongue-tying. Is a views and values statement. So it's the exact same sentence from here to here, but by putting in that little bit at the start, we're acknowledging that the author has crafted this text and how the author feels about Mary Cat, a young woman, having her freedom from fulfilling expected gender roles, that she values, she supports this idea that a young woman should be free from having to fulfill expected gender roles. And it's just that simple little bit at the start that really lifts that sentence up. Some other useful words for blending the author's name into a sentence include Jackson challenges, condemns, opposes, denounces. So these are all things that indicate that Jackson is critical of something that's happened. Jackson endorses, supports, celebrates, validates. These are all suggestions that Jackson supports or is happy about a development in the text. She's happy about what that development shows about society. Jackson ponders, questions, explores. These are all ideas that Jackson is curious about this. She's exploring it. She hasn't come to a positive or negative conclusion. Jackson demonstrates, infers, suggests are similar as well. It's a less straightforward. She's for it or against it. She's hinting at things rather than being clearly one side or the other. Another way that you can upgrade your body paragraph is by exploring the context within it. If it is relevant, then include it. If it is not relevant, don't include it. Context is something that you want to be careful with, that it can often feel forced, like you've put it in there just for the sake of ticking a box. So think about if it is relevant. It often goes hand in hand with the authorial views and values. So if the author is critiquing something about society, then you also need to know about the society, the context of the society she's living in that she's critiquing. So often they are connected. This is because the author's views and values are about the world around them, and they generally write in response to what they think and feel about their lives, about their own personal context. You can mention the context or the author's views and values anywhere throughout the paragraph, but it can work really well to put them in that closing sentence because it helps connect all those different examples together. They're often showing or highlighting that bigger picture of what the author is saying about a particular aspect of their world. One tip I would suggest is that you do not write about context in every paragraph. As long as it's mentioned somewhere within the essay, try to only add it if it is actually going to upgrade, lift the idea or the views and values you're exploring. Don't force it in. Make sure it's there at a relevant point. If you need a reminder about what that context is, please have a look at Lesson 2A, which explores the context and the values within our text. I'd like you to have a think about which is the most relevant context for this idea. So it's the same essay topic that We've Always Lived in the Castle examines the consequences of isolation and confinement, discuss. This is the topic sentence, and I want you to think about what's the most relevant context. A positive consequence of isolation and confinement is that it allows the Blackwood sisters to be free from being controlled by their father or Charles. Okay, so have a look at these different context statements and think about which one is the most relevant to this topic sentence idea. Okay, hopefully you were able to identify B as the correct answer. This is not related to communism and the Cold War. It's not talking about hysteria or fear. It's not even talking about financial or economic imbalances, so it's not related to that. It's not related to the personal context of living in a small town. There's really no mention of the town within this body paragraph. This is something that's relevant for a different body paragraph where we're talking about the villages, but this particular idea doesn't relate to that at all. And it also doesn't relate to that personal context of Jackson suffering from agoraphobia, because it's not about that feeling of being entrapped and scared to leave the house. Instead, it's talking about that positive consequence and not being controlled by male patriarchal figures. And so it's talking about the nuclear family, those patriarchal figures, the father or Charles trying to force control over the women within the family who they would see as subordinate to them. The final way that you can upgrade your body paragraph that I'm going to talk about in this lesson is by upgrading your linking sentence. A strong linking sentence, remember, does link the evidence together and ties it back to the essay topic and contention. It also does not introduce the next paragraph. Which would disrupt the flow. With that in mind, I'd like you to have a look at a comparison of an upgraded linking sentence with a basic one. By the end of the novel, both sisters are able to embrace the freedom that their isolation and confinement brings, showing that the consequences are not always negative. So that does tick the box. It meets the expectations, but we have the opportunity here to make it cover some of those other things that a body paragraph needs to cover, things like context and things like the authorial views and values. So remember that this is a good way to add in those areas of the criteria that you need to meet. So, by the end of the novel, Jackson validates both sisters for embracing the freedom that their isolation and confinement brings. So, views and values. Challenging her mid-century audience to consider the negative impact the patriarchal nuclear family has on women and to recognise the positives that escaping societal confines can bring. So a lot of big words there, but basically what it's saying is that Jackson is challenging her audience, 1950s audience, to think about the negative impact of the nuclear family, the negative impact that it has on women in particular. And she's also challenging her audience to recognize the positives that can happen for women who aren't confined by those societal expectations. All right, so let's double check what an upgraded body paragraph looks like. We're going to go back and see what tips and tricks it has met, and then we're going to look at an upgraded body paragraph to see how we can enhance what we've got. You'll notice that it is not idea-based. It's focused more on being about Constance, the sisters, and their father and Charles. And so it hasn't really met that first criteria, but it has been a clear, relevant, and concise topic sentence. We have that blended evidence in, and she isn't treated like a slave and having boyfriends, so we've blended it in smoothly. We haven't made it really jagged the way it moves between quotes. We haven't just put a quote in as its own individual sentence. We've blended them in by picking the most important part of the quote. We could also, however, improve our exploration of these relevant quotes that we've selected by exploring the text features and meta-language. So that's something that is missing from this basic original body paragraph that we could add in, and we've looked at what type of meta-language would be relevant, text features would be relevant. We also don't have these final two parts in here, which would enhance and upgrade our body paragraph. So they're absent from our original sample. This sample, however, does include them. You'll notice that the topic sentence has been changed to be more idea-based. So instead of saying Charles and their father, what I've done is I've used what Charles and the father represent in society. So in this case, they represent patriarchal figures, and patriarchal expectations. I've also removed the sisters and I've substituted them with what they represent in society. And in this case, they represent single women, unmarried women. So to move it from being specific to characters and make it a more universal idea, I've switched out those text-specific phrases for what they symbolize. It's still a clear and concise topic sentence. That required a little bit of tweaking to that sentence to make sure it stayed nice and confined. So I'm going to read out the body paragraph and I'll explain those upgrades as I go. Finally, a positive consequence of isolation and confinement is that it allows single women to be free from being controlled by patriarchal expectations. For example, Constance has control over which visitors she allows in her house and what she chooses to fill her day with without being answerable to anyone. So pretty similar to the previous body paragraph. Even though she takes care of Mary Cat and Uncle Julian, she's happy to do so and isn't treated like a slave, like she was by her parents and by Charles. So again, relevant and specific evidence and that blended evidence. The main difference is that unlike patriarchal figures, so there's been this connection to explain how Charles and her father are patriarchal figures who invaded her space and demanded obedience. Constance and Mary Kat's relationship is codependent, and they protect each other. And Jackson ensures Mary Kat's character maintains a subordinate tone when speaking with Constance, always prefacing needs with, will you or may I? And so I explained how that was a relevant text feature, that subordinate tone that Jackson makes sure Mary Kat always uses. And by saying that she's ensuring it, I'm saying that she supports this relationship, this codependent relationship. Like her sister, Mary Kat also finds control and freedom as a consequence of their isolation and confinement away from patriarchal figures. Her routine and rituals are all about trying to maintain the protection that their isolation brings. She buried and placed safeguards around the property, believing that they ensured nothing could get in to harm them. So remember how I noted there was a lack of balance between the two pieces of evidence? This upgraded body paragraph has fleshed out the amount of exploration of that second piece of evidence there is. Jackson celebrates. So I've embedded that author's purpose and views and values. How Mary Kat's isolation also gave her freedom from fulfilling expected gender roles, like wandering outside whenever she felt like, not needing to quieten down or have boyfriends, and being able to wear a tablecloth instead of a dress. By the end of the novel, Jackson validates both sisters for embracing the freedom that their isolation and confinement brings, challenging her mid-century audience to consider the negative impact the patriarchal nuclear family has on women and to recognise the positives that escaping societal confines can bring. I've already talked about how this contextual views and values final statement is a much stronger linking sentence because it connects to all of those examples and evidence that has been explored throughout the rest of the paragraph, and it also links really clearly back to that topic sentence about patriarchal expectations, and it really clearly links back to the positives of being confined. Hopefully that is a really clear example of how you can use these strategies, these upgrading strategies, to enhance the quality of your body paragraph. So some of the key takeaways from this lesson: use text features and meta language that build on and relate to the evidence that you've included. Try including authorial views and values to help you explain why these meanings are created. Add context and audience if it will upgrade the idea. Okay, so don't force it in, only add it in if it's relevant. And link your sentence to your topic and contention, and it can be a good place to add in those views and values and context statements in that linking sentence. Please join me for our next lesson where I'll be looking at how to use evidence and quotes.